We have a team of fantastic women from the Armenian International Women's Association, centered in Boston, with headquarters elsewhere as well. One of the team is missing, that's Barbara Mergarian, but tonight we're very excited to have Joy Rangelian-Bergi, to have Judy Saryan, to have Danila Terpanjan, and to have Lisa Gulessarian. And these women will all be introduced as we go on by Judy Saryan, who is going to be our first speaker. Judith Saryan, in another lifetime, was the vice president and portfolio manager at Eaton Vance Management, but she retired in order to do all kinds of volunteer work, and this work especially, she's become really a professional champion of Zabel Yessayan, and she knows everything about her. She is also currently the treasurer at the National Association of Armenian Studies and Research in Watertown, in Belmont. So Judy is maybe retired, but she's an extremely busy woman. And I would like to hand over to Judy right now. And she's going to be introducing the evening and then introducing in turn each of her fellow team members. And at the end, we'll come back and I will be moderating the questions. Okay, so Judy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Susan and Tato. I hope you can hear me. I'm very happy to be part of this discussion today. We are going to start with a short video that we prepared as a group, which is about Srpuhi Dussap and her book, Mayda, Echoes of Protest. AIWA recently published this book, and it is now available from AIWA or from other bookstores. After the video, I will discuss the cultural awakening, which is also known as Zartonk, which inspired the pioneering works of Srpuhi Dussap and Zabel Yessayan. And I will give brief biographies of these two women. After which Dr. Lisa Gulessarian will have a discussion of the evolution of the Armenian literary language from to Ashgharapar, or the vernacular. Danila Terpanjan will read the author's preface to Mayda in the original Armenian, and Joy Rangelian-Bergi will then read from Zabel Yessayan's The Gardens of Silihdar, and we'll find out how Zabel Yessayan met Madame Dussap. Dr. Barbara Mergarian, who is one of the co-founders of AIWA and is a very active member of the publishing team, she really did lead the effort to translate Mayda, and I believe she's on the call. Let's get started with the video. Lisa?
Sounds not working.
With these words, Ottoman Armenian writer Srpuhi Dussap prefaced her pioneering feminist novel.
Can I just ask, was sound heard in that? I have a few people saying it's not, they didn't hear it.
Now it's on. If we can start again. Thank
okay,
you.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Mayda, Echoes of Protest. An Ottoman Armenian feminist novel by Srpuhi Dussap. The pen should be an instrument of truth. With these words, Ottoman Armenian writer Srpuhi Dussap prefaced her pioneering feminist novel, Mayda. The book caused a sensation upon its publication in Istanbul in 1883, with some condemning its call for the equal rights of women as a threat to traditional Armenian values, while others praised its promotion of social justice for everyone as a progressive step for the nation. Dussap's controversial epistolary novel of romance, betrayal, and reconciliation is now available for the first time in English with AIWA Press's latest publication, Mayda, Echoes of Protest. As we read through the correspondence of two fictional characters, an attractive but despondent young widow, Mayda, and her wise friend, Madame Sira, we encounter a compelling love story that nevertheless makes sharp critiques of 19th century Ottoman Armenian society while entertaining us. Readers today will identify with Dussap's themes of love and marriage, religion and ignorance, and work and motherhood, as well as her demands for the following rights for all, including women: access to education, gainful employment, and mutual respect from the opposite gender. Affirming a commitment to publishing the work of important Armenian women in translation, AIWA's Mayda is the sixth book in the organization's Treasury of Armenian Women's Literature series. Generously supported by the Dolores Zohrab Liebman Fund, its release follows AIWA's publication of 3 works by Zabel Yessayan, who is inspired by Dussap. Translated by Narek Seferian, edited by Dr. Lisa Gulessarian of Harvard University, with the assistance of AIWA's publication team of Barbara Mergerian, Joy Rengilian-Bergy, Judith A. Saryan, and Danila Jebejian-Terpanjian, and designed by Talin Bogosyan. The book also includes an introduction by Professor Valentina Calzolari of the University of Geneva, who places the work in the context of women's emancipation and Armenian literature in 19th century Istanbul. Mayda, Echoes of Protest, is available for purchase directly from AIWA or booksellers nationwide. Experience the power of the pen that wrote the following words: Hachtorem, zi oktagarem, zi gekorzem, zi martem. I have emerged the victor, for I am useful, for I act, for I am a human being. Mayda.
When it was published in 1883, Mayda was attacked by many Armenian intellectuals. They regarded her support for equal rights for women as a threat to traditional Armenian values. We hear those same words today. Starting with Srpuhi Dussap, and even earlier with Elbis Gesaratsyan, who published the very first feminist periodical in Constantinople, these demands for equal rights for women have not changed for the past 160 years. Srpuhi Dussap was born in 1841. Healthy, well-established family in Constantinople. Her father died when she was only 1 year old, and her mother, Nazli Vahanyan, was very well educated, and she encouraged and supported Srpuhi's education. Nazli Vahanyan was a very active member of the community. She founded a girls' school in the 1850s. She was also a founder and an active participant in several philanthropical organizations. Modeled after the French salons, Nazli Vahanyan herself hosted a salon which included leading intellectuals who gathered to discuss social, cultural, and political issues. Srpuhi benefited tremendously from this very rich cultural environment. She went to a French school, she had private tutors, and she knew Latin, Greek, French, and she was obviously excellent in languages, and her Armenian teacher was a romantic poet, Mugardisht Beşiktaşyan. She married Paul Dussap, who was a French musician, and he encouraged her life's work. Together, they also hosted gatherings in their house, cultural gatherings, with events such as musical performances, etc. They had 2 children together, a boy and a girl. Srpuhi Dussap wrote articles. In 1883, she published Mayda. This was the very first novel written by an Armenian woman, and it was the first novel to address issues of women's rights. In this story of romance, Dussap talks about the importance of girls' education, about gainful employment, and about women having the power to make decisions about their own lives. Many prominent Armenians criticized her work, including the writer and parliamentarian Krikor Zorab, who said that women should grace the home. Now, as an aside, I would like to acknowledge the generous grant for this publication from the Dolores Zorab Liebman Foundation. Dolores Zorab was the daughter of Krikor Zorab. This criticism did not stop Srpuhi Dussap. She published 2 more novels which delved into these similar and other issues relating to women, and they're entitled Siranush and Araxia. Many of these ideas about women and feminism actually resonate with us today and are the same types of issues and challenges that we face, not only within the Armenian community, but also in the larger community. Zabel Yessayan was also born in the 19th century in the city of Constantinople, not quite 40 years after Srpuhi Dussap was born, but under different circumstances. Her family was working class. They were always struggling financially. Zabel's close relationship was with her father, not her mother. Her father encouraged her education. In fact, we learned from the Gardens of Silihdar, Yessayan's memoir, that she learned how to read at the age of 4, sitting with him while drinking tea, or at least while he was drinking tea. He always emphasized to her the importance of human rights, encouraged her attention to women's rights, and talked all the time about human dignity and the need to respect other human beings. Yessayan's education was also quite different from Srpuhi Dussap. She spent a short time at a small religious school, and then she attended the Srphi school in Scudari in Constantinople. This school still exists today. She graduated when she was 14 after 4 years, and then after that she studied on her own. She read voraciously. She had the opportunity to attend Madame Matakyan's salon, which included intellectuals and other literary figures. This was a very important experience for her. One of the writers she met was Arshak Chobanyan, a well-known publisher and writer who published periodical Zarik. Yessayan was only 17 when 2 of her first works were actually published in the periodical Zarik. Now, this was in 1895, at the time of the Hamidian massacres, which were raging in the provinces. They had also reached Constantinople, and there was violence in the city. Yessayan's father was worried about her. He was concerned for her safety because she had been involved in this salon. And even though, by and large, it was not a place where politics was the emphasis, still many of the publishers and writers were involved in newspapers, which would have naturally had some political focus. He was able to find a way to send her to Paris to study at the Sorbonne. She was the first Ottoman woman to be able to go to Paris to study there. Now, this was not an easy thing for the family, and we don't really know how they managed it financially, but we do know that Zabel worked once she was in France, and this was her life dream to actually pursue her higher education in Europe, because she knew that in order to be a great writer, she needed to have an excellent education. While she was in Paris, she married Dussap Yessayan, and they had a daughter together. And then in 1902, she returned to Constantinople, and she wrote her first novel, In the Waiting Room, Spasman Sarahimech. And she wrote about a North African Jewish emigre in Paris who was discriminated against at the maternity hospital. The book focuses on themes that Yessayan would return to over and over again: exile and alienation. Now, she was the editor of the women's pages of this periodical. So she published her own work, which I think was very resourceful of her. This book actually did not appear in book form until very recently. Yessayan was only 24 at this time. She continued to write many articles and gained a reputation for her forthright positions on women's rights. She also wrote several novels at this time and gained quite notoriety in the community, so much so that at the time of the massacres of Adana, the church actually reached out to Zabel Yessayan and asked her to go to Adana to witness the devastation and to provide relief for the orphans. She later wrote a book about it, which probably many of you know about, In the Ruins, Averagnerumech. Srpuhi Dussap and Zabel Yessayan had very different backgrounds and educations, but there were common elements during this time of cultural awakening in Constantinople. Institutions were developing in the late 19th century Armenian society that had a big influence on them and the society at large. And I want to thank here Victoria Rowe and Valentina Calzolari for their insights on the impact of this cultural renaissance on these writers. First, there were the salons, and I've talked about that already. Nazli Vahanyan, Srpuhi Dussap's mother, held a salon. Srpuhi Dussap and her husband had gatherings, cultural gatherings. And Zabel Yessayan really became, inspired by attending Madame Matakian's salon, where she met other writers and publishers. These were mixed gatherings of men and women. And this was one of the few places men and women could congregate at this time. Many of these salons focused on social, national, and cultural issues. The second institution is philanthropic organizations, which offered social and educational services for the community. These areas, the social services and schools, had traditionally been in the purview of religious authorities. So something was changing here, and this was a way for secular leaders to challenge the church. These philanthropic organizations developed new leadership in the community, and this included women who were running schools and actually running some of these organizations. And I mentioned Nazli Vahanyan, again, who founded the girls' school and founded the philanthropic organization. Srpuhi Dussap was active in the organizations, as well as Zabel Yessayan. 3, educational opportunities. They expanded for a wider segment of the community. Before, it was very limited, primarily people connected with the church. Now, girls and boys in the cities, as well as in the provinces, were able to get some education. And this, of course, was due to the philanthropic organizations that not only organized these schools, but funded them. The fourth institution is the periodical, which was the main public forum where we saw the debate of many of these new ideas. And the fifth is the Armenian language itself. As the written language changed from classical to vernacular, more people had access to reading, and they were reading books, periodicals, newspapers. There were hundreds of these newspapers in Constantinople at the time. To speak about the evolution of the language is Dr. Lisa Gulessarian. She's preceptor of Armenian language and culture at Harvard University. At Harvard and elsewhere, she has taught courses and published articles on traumatic pasts, female revolutionaries, ghosts, and contemporary Armenian film and literature. She is currently at work on an interactive online textbook for Western Armenian. Lisa.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank Judy for that wonderful introduction to Zabel Yessayan and Srpuhi Dussap, and also to me, so thank you. I want to also thank the Armenian Institute for putting on this event, and I want to, on the part of our editorial team for Mayda, to say thank you for inviting us to this evening and for us to share this information about these authors that we all love. So I'm going to speak today about the literary contribution of Srpuhi Dussap's Mayda to the world of Armenian literature. The world was a different place when Srpuhi Dussap published her novel Mayda in 1883. Women had not gained the right to vote in the Ottoman Empire, the United States, Britain, nor France. The Ottoman Empire was still in power, though in decline. And Ottoman Armenians were in the midst of a cultural renaissance that Judy was talking about, the Zartonk, they had not seen since the golden ages in the 5th century. I'd like to focus tonight on the literary contribution of Mayda given this context. Dussap's novel is revolutionary, not only for having been written at all, but also for how it was written. At the time of Mayda's publication in Constantinople, today's Istanbul, in 1883, the Armenian literary and intellectual community in the city was largely a male-dominated space. Women writers were not common in Dussap's generation. I'm not suggesting that Ottoman Armenian women did not write at all in the late 19th century. Elvis Gesaratsyan, who Judy also mentioned, edited a women's periodical called Guitar in 1862 for 7 months, while Sibyl published poems in Masis and Hayrenik in the 1880s. What I'm highlighting here, however, is that women writers were few and far between. Writing was still a heavily male-dominated field. We will hear about the difficult experience of Ottoman Armenian women writers later in tonight's program with a reading of Zabel Yessayan's meeting with Dussap. If writing as a woman was in and of itself an unusual occurrence in the urban Armenian community of the Ottoman Empire, Dussap's decision to write her novel in Ashkharapar, or vernacular Western Armenian, and not Karapar, or classical Armenian, was equally groundbreaking. Before the mid-19th century, when the Zartonk, or awakening, began, Armenian was written in only classical Armenian. The vernacular was strictly an oral language. Once the Renaissance began, in the latter half of the 19th century, intellectuals in Constantinople debated about the acceptable form of written Armenian. The conservative elements of society wanted to preserve the classical language, known mostly by scholars and the clergy, as the only written form, while progressives advocated for the development of their spoken language into a literary form accessible to a broader audience. As these debates about language caused rifts in the intellectual community, the first novel published in modern Western Armenian Hovannes Hisaryan's Khosrov and Makruhi, was published in 1851. After its controversial publication, few novelists dared to write in the vernacular. The exceptions are the writer Zerents, who published 3 historical novels between 1877 and 1881, and Mateusz Mamurian, who published an epistolary novel called English Letters in 1881. So in 1883, there were only a handful of novels written in vernacular and not classical Armenian. It's in this context that Dussap began writing. Her literary career blossomed in the 1880s when she turned from poetry to prose. She wrote the brief work, The Spoken Armenian Language, in 1880 to promote modern Western Armenian as a literary form. After publishing this short piece, she began working on the novel that would become Mayda. By the time she began writing, progressive advocates for Ashkharapar had penned articles, written textbooks, and translated into a readable vernacular the revolutionary texts of Europe. So when Dussap began writing Mayda, the vernacular was just starting to be used as a written language. Writing her novel in the Armenian she spoke was another way that Dussap opened opportunities for writers that came after her. Dussap's contribution to the history of Armenian literature should be noted. You will hear a reading of Dussap's preface next. Therein, Dussap consciously articulates that she was entering uncharted territory as a writer advocating for social justice who happened to be a woman. You will hear our next speaker, Danila Jebejian-Terpanjian, read the author's preface in its original Armenian so that we can appreciate its revolutionary beauty. Thank you.
May I introduce Danila? Can you hear me?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay, I think, Danila, I would love to introduce you now.
Oh, okay.
Danila Jebejian-Terpanjian was library manager and senior cataloger at Harvard University. She is a member of AIWA's publication committee, which publishes works of female Ottoman Armenian writers and activists. Thank you, Danila, in advance, and we look forward to hearing you read.
Okay. So, good evening. Before I start reading in Armenian, I just want to say that the English version will be in the chat if you want to follow the English version at the same time. Mayda Harachapan. Խիստ զարգահասակ էի դագավին, երբ սկսա գարթալ այնպիսի հեղինակներ, որ ընկերական և գրոնական զեղծմանց թեմ կփողոքեին ուշքին։ Այդ փողոքը արձական կդավ սրդիս մեջ, մտածս մշտադև նյութն եղավ և մանավանդ քաչալևվեցա մորս զարգացած և լուրջ քաղաքարներեն, որոնցմով ինքը գփայլեր շադոնցվնեի վեր հայասկին հետատեմ աշխարհին վրա։ Ոչինչ այնչափ զորավոր է, որչափ մայրենի խրախույսը, ուստի անցիս հես գաջեր իս զեղծմանց թեմ թշնամություն և արդարության համար սեր, փայտ սերմ անզոր և անխոս, զիաբրած միջավայրս, լրության գթադապար դերզիս։ Վերջապես հասավ այն օրը հորում փախտագից եղավ ինձ քեղարվեստի զավակ մի, այսինքն անհունության զավակ, զիքեղարվեստն անձիրն է։ Ներթաշնագության աշխարհներու մեջ ազադորեն թեքերող ջոխ միտքը բնականաբես սահմանափակ միջավայրերու և նախաբաժանման թշնամին լալով ազատ թողուցիս մտածելու և փողոքելու։ Այսօր հրաբարագավ երախտագիտությանս դուրքը կմադուցանեմ ամուսնույս հոգվույս պետք է հասկացած, քաչալերած և գերբով մորս ընթացքը շարունակած ըլլալուն համար։ Ուստի բավական ժամանակ էի վեր հոգիս կմաշեր ընկերային այլևայլ ողորմելի նախապաշարմանց դեսարանին, կտեսնեի, կցավեի, Հերնով գփողոքեի, իսկ այսօր քրչով գփողոքեմ։ Ինչ փույթ ինձ կարողությանս նվազությունը, ինչ փույթ թարաքննությունը։ Ես խղճիս ցայնին գհնազանդիմ, պետք մի գլրացնեմ փավ ինձ այդ։ Գգրտնեմ, անիրավության և նախաբաշարման թշնամին եմ։ Հետևաբար սրտմտելով գտեսնեմ այն շղթաները, որով գանացի սերը գաշկանթված է, այնպես որ գնոջ ոչ խոսքը, ոչ գործը և ոչ շարժումը բնական է կամ ճշմարիտ։ Եվ միթե լուծի ներքև ճշմարտությունը կգրնա ապրիլ երբեք։ Գնոջ ցավալի վիճակը խորհրդածությանս առարկա եղած է միշտ։ Զիգինն ընկերության ողորմելի զոհն է։ Գամաչենա սիրելու, այսինքն սիրտ ունենալը խոստովանելու։ Գամաչե արդարության փառը հնչելու, այսինքն իրավունք ունենալը հայտարարելու։ Գամաչե գրոնից և օրինակ զեղծմունքը հայտնելու, այսինքն խիղճ և խանականություն ունենալը ապացուցանելու։ Վերջապես, գամաչե յուր փարոյական հանգամանքն ամբողջապես ի հանդես հանելու։ Ես եմ, ես ևս ի հաշիվ կրնամ մտնել ըսելու։ Ուստի գլխի գոր, ափիփերան գաբրի, գանցնի աշխարհես անցայն և անշշուկ, և որչափ աննշմարելի լա ընթացքն, այնչափ քովելի։ Ահա մեր այժմացավալի գացությունը, որոթեմ գփողոքե մեծն Ամերիկա, օրանն ազատության և յուր փողոքներն սկսած են արցական գտնալ Եվրոպայի մեջ և օր ավուր սորանալ։ Վիպասանական պատմության ցևով փափակեցա անգերական զեղծված գլխավորները նշանակել, հետևաբար մեծ կամ չափավոր կատարելությամբ վեբ մի հեղինակած հավակնությունը չունիմ։ Ուզեցի ճշմարտությունը հայտնել ախորժելի ցևի ներքև և այս եղավ գլխավոր քրքիրս վեբ մի գրելու, թեև գխոստովանիմ, որ այս երկը հորինելու մղվեցա նաև հանջարեղ և ներողամիտ բարեկամները, որոնց ցայնը միշտ ասացություն ունեցած է վրաս։ Ընթերցողացս ներողամտությունը կխնդրեմ երգիս նկատմամբ, որ եթե զուրկ է ամենայն կատարելու թենե քոնե սամիակ առավելությունն ունի, որ խղճմտական քաջությամբ ճշմարտությունն արտահայտված է անդ։ Գիտեմ, որ ոմանք պիտի վիրավորվին, ոմանք պիտի սրտմտին, շատերը հանցուկն պիտի համարին զիս։ Քրիչը ճշմարտության կորձիկն լալու է, ինչ փույթ, եթե հալածվի և թադաբարդվի։ Ճշմարտությունը վսեմ նահատակությունը չէ արդյոք։ Srpuhi Dussap, Բոլիս 1883 End of preface.
Srpuhi Dussap inspired and influenced the next generation of women writers, including Arshagui Teotik, Mari Belarian, Sibyl, and Zabel Yessayan. All these pioneering female writers wrote about political issues, and they addressed human rights and social justice. They focused on education for girls and the lack of decision-making power that women had in their own lives. They fought to get voices heard. They fought to get their voices heard, and they took action. Despite challenges, these writers and activists all made a name for themselves in the male-dominated culture. However, their prominence quickly faded. As you will hear in the short passage that Joy will read, during her lifetime, Dussap was forgotten. Even though her novels created a sensation when they were published, they were widely read, and they sold out very quickly. The editions sold out very quickly. It's worthwhile to consider why this happened, and it's something we could perhaps discuss in the Q&A. It's crucial to bring these works to light, to make them available in English, so that the current generation and future generations can continue to be inspired by these great women. Joy Rengilian-Bergy will read from The Gardens of Silihdar by Zabel Yessayan, translated by Jennifer Manoukian and published by AIWA. At Wellesley College, Joy Rengilian-Bergy is the Associate Professor of Latin American Literature and Film. Past president of AIWA and other professional organizations, she is an author and a dame, which was conferred on her by King Philip of Spain. Joy.
Zabel Yessayan, in her memoir, Gardens of Silihdar, in this chapter recalls the tribulations that her teenage companions went through when they were so restricted by their families. They suffered greatly, and they, with Zabel, would read the works of Srpuhi Dussap, where they found inspiration and they looked for solutions to their problems. And then they went to visit Srpuhi Dussap. In those days, I was concerned about two friends who were in constant conflicts with their families. They would often come to me to bitterly complain about their problems and how they were going to rebel against their families. My friend Eugenie would come home every evening with her head hung like a lamb returning to the barn and silently endure the wrath of her barbaric father. My other friend, Verkine, would resort to unusual means to assert her independence. She cut her hair short, which was not common in those days. She dressed simply and wore a man's tie. All of this surprised me because personally, I never found it necessary to express my independence in such overt ways. But Verkine thought that it was critical to overcoming the restrictions placed on her. They both talked about how they wanted to escape their dull lives and to do something. But what should they do? They didn't know and would often be troubled by periods of sadness and despair. We used to read Madame Dussap's books together, and in the work of that feminist author, we tried to find solutions to the problems we faced. Sometimes our other friend, Arshagui, would join us. My friends hoped that I would write about these issues and finally do something. But what? We couldn't formulate a plan. Their issues really made me think. And one day, Arshagui and I finally decided to make a visit to Madame Dussap. Our hearts pounding, we walked up to the Armenian feminist writer's house, armed with all the courage we could muster. Arshagui was paralyzed with fear and wanted to turn back. Zabel, let's come another day instead, she said, as we stood in front of Madame Dussap's door. I put my finger on the doorbell. A maid opened the door and led us into the hall. and the living room where sat Srpuhi Dussap, entirely dressed in black. Even after 10 years, she remained inconsolable over the death of her 16-year-old daughter, Dora. Madame Dussap's curly white hair framed an attractive face marked by profound grief. When she saw us enter and she saw us hesitate, she got up, walked towards us, and extended her hands. Her slightly full lips smiled softly and expressed great kindness. Taking me in one hand and Srpuhi in the other, she led us towards her chair and invited us to sit in the two chairs next to hers. We both seemed to have lost our ability to speak and had entirely forgotten what we had prepared to say. But Madame Dussap did not give us time to feel embarrassed. She immediately started asking us questions and spoke to us with warmth and encouragement. She was clearly moved by our visit. By that time, Madame Dussap was a forgotten writer. Many didn't even know if she was still alive. A new star was shining in the Armenian literary skies of Constantinople, Zabel. She was now the official woman writer. I had read Zabel's novellas and poetry and had the audacity to dislike that genre of literature, despite its general appeal. I thought that the famous frilly poet, as she was called, busied herself by writing petty and unimportant things. My large, budding intellectual appetite was not satiated by the precious daintiness of her writing. Hearing that I had hoped to be a writer, Madame Dussap tried to warn me. She said that for women, the world of literature was full of many more thorns than laurels. She told me that in our day and age, a woman who wanted to carve out a place for herself in society still was not tolerated. To overcome all of these obstacles, I needed to exceed mediocrity. In her words, a male writer was free to be mediocre, but a female writer was not.